Hello everyone and welcome to an absolute thriller of a game from the last round of the 23rd European Team Championship. It's Team France versus Team Azerbaijan, and on board one we have Alireza Firouzja versus Shakhriyar Mamedyarov, another former member of the 2800 club, and as usual we are continuing this mini Alireza saga. Will he reach the 2800 rating, and will he be the youngest ever person to ever achieve this incredible milestone? So it's a brutal game. You guys are going to enjoy it. Let's check it out. Alireza has the white pieces and he opens with e4. We have e5 by Mamedyarov, knight to f3, knight to c6, and bishop to c4. The Italian game is on the board. We have bishop to c5, the Giuoco Piano, and now, I know you guys are thinking Alireza probably went for the Evans Gambit because, he needs a win to clinch that 2800, but, your surprise is, just as great as mine. He doesn't. He goes for castles, and now we have knight to f6. We have d3, so this is all very standard stuff, the top of the moves. H6 and c3 now, preparing to strike in the center at some point. Also, you could start expanding on the queen side. We have d6 and rook to e1, castles by Mamedyarov, and now h3, taking away that g4 square from Mamedyarov's pieces. We have a5 now, stopping white's expansion on the queen side, and knight b to d2. So many lines played in this exact same line, nothing out of the ordinary here. Bishop to e6, and now not bishop to b5. Bishop to b5 is the move that pretty much everyone plays here. Alireza just captures on e6. This is supposed to be a surprise, as there are very few games where this was played. So okay, Mamedyarov captures. We have f captures on e6. Now black has a doubled e-pawn, but he does get a semi-open file for his rook, which could be used for attacking purposes. We have knight to b3, and now there is a game where bishop to b6 was played, but here Mamedyarov plays bishop to a7, and it is now already, as of move 11, that we have a completely new game, which is pretty incredible for a Giuoco Piano. Now, it's pretty much the same, because in the game where bishop to b6 was played, the idea is the same. Bishop to e3, we want to counter black's bishop, as it's just a monster here, and our own dark square bishop isn't really doing all that much. So bishop captures on e3, rook captures on e3, and now a4, pushing back the knight, so we win more space, and we limit the mobility of Alireza's knight on b3, so knight back to d2, and now Mamedyarov strikes in the center with d5. We have rook to e2, getting that rook out of the way, so d4 does not count with tempo. And here Mamedyarov really has to figure out how to go about this position, and he spent some half an hour contemplating his next move, because you have to figure it out perfectly, and he does it. He plays b5. And now, what's the idea behind this? Very nice expansion. Can Alireza just play e captures on d5 and then pick up the pawn on e5? And if not, why not? Alireza plays e captures on d5, but now not e captures on d5. Mamedyarov plays knight captures on d5. If you play e captures on d5, then yes, you can pick up the pawn on e5. But after knight captures on d5, you can't really capture this pawn, because if you go for something like knight captures on e5 now, or rather, you could capture it now, but first we have a3. If you go for this, it's a very tricky line where black gets to play this a3 move, puts pressure on the b2 pawn, and then, well, it becomes weak. The c3 pawn is undermined also, and it's just a very ugly position to face. Even after b captures, you could also, this could also be met with something like queen to f6, going after the f2 pawn, going after the rook, the knight still attacking c3. So maybe a bit too much to allow black. So Alireza, after knight captures on d5, just plays a3, prevents black from playing a3. And now knight to f4, attacking the rook and the d3 pawn, and it looks like a really good position for black. Rook to e3 by Alireza, and now the question is, can you capture the d3 pawn? Not really. If you capture d3, then we play queen f1. Now we attack the knight twice, and after knight moves, we play queen captures on b5, and this is not very good for white. This is hanging. It's not and not something you would go for with black. So instead, you could go for the repetition with knight to d5, but it's a question whether this is in the true spirit of chess game and of the competition, because here Azerbaijan and France are battling it out for first place. There are a couple of other very strong teams like Ukraine, but nothing is still known. So you have to play. So we don't see a repetition here. Instead, we have queen to e8. Of course, after this, rook to e3. So not a repetition with something like knight d5, rook back to e1, knight back to f4, but queen to e8 by Mamedyarov. And now he wants to bring his queen into the attack, which would be very good. Also, there would be additional pressure on d3, and he wants to, well, maybe double up rooks on the f file and continue this attack. So how can Alireza go about this? He starts with the g3. It's a very, very interesting move. He gives up his h3 pawn, but he will get his king to a bit of a safer square and open up the h file so he can use it for his pieces. And while you could go back with something like knight d5, then, for example, rook back to e1 as the rook is attacked, queen to g6, Mamedyarov boldly grabs the pawn and says, all right, what do you got? He plays knight captures on h3 check, king to g2, and now knight to g5. Getting the knight to safety. Alireza captures here. We have knight captures, h captures, and now queen to g4, putting pressure on g5 and e6. And the situation on the clock here is some 39 minutes for Alireza and 35 minutes for Mamedyarov. So still quite a few moves have to be played before reaching move 40 and being granted additional time. So rook to f5, defending against both threats, and now comes knight to f3. And this is maybe a position where rook to h1 would have been a better idea. Point is that we want to play queen h3, try and do some damage here, but black would have to be incredibly precise to survive this. Something like knight to e7, for example, queen h3 going here, and now even g4, saying that, okay, if you deliver this check, my king will be perfectly fine on f7, so you're going to have to capture here, and then I'm going to play knight to d5, attack your rook, and after the rook moves, something like knight to f6, and then maybe black can, survive this. But instead, Alireza played knight to f3. Also, knight to e4 is a possibility, but knight to f3 allows black to really increase the pressure. Here, Mamedyarov played queen to f7. Now, the knight can't really move because we're going to capture on f2. But even though the knight could move, for example, knight captures on g5, rook captures on f2 with check, and now we could move the king to g1, and now what do you play? The queen is still hanging, we would have to play queen to f5, and now we just capture. Queen captures here, and what do you play? Now you can't capture with the pawn to undouble because your rook is hanging, you'd have to capture with the rook, then knight captures on e6, attacks c7, for example, defending, and we get this sort of an equalish position with equal material, but Alireza has 2 pawn islands, Mamedyarov has 3 pawn islands, so maybe white would be slightly better. But there's also another fine line after knight captures on g5 not capturing here. You could play queen g6, just attack the knight cannot move, the queen here would be hanging, so here maybe queen e4, attack the knight, and now rook a to f8, a really crazy maneuver. Knight h3, we have to guard the f2 pawn, and now knight back to e7, and now maybe we can play this. So this is what would happen basically. If after this queen to f7 move, we go for knight captures on g5. But Alireza goes for queen to e4 instead, attacks the knight. If the knight moves, the rook hangs, so how can Mamedyarov survive this? He plays rook to f8, now triples here on the f file, and now, well, a move like g4 could be troublesome if you capture the knight. If the knight is captured, g4, and, well, you are not going to keep the piece. That's the least of your concerns. So instead, we have rook to h1. Finally, this rook enters the attack, and now you have to be careful. If the rook moves, queen to h7 will be checkmate, as the rook and queen both cover the h7 square. So how do you defend this? Well, there are a couple of really good ways. The best one seems to be queen to f6, and we're going to show it even though it wasn't played in the game. Now, the point is, after g4, of course, we want the rook to move, so we have access to the h7 square. Another weird arrow, sorry about that. Problem is, after rook to f4, you can't capture on c6. If you capture on c6, then we can easily, bring this to a draw. Just captures here, and after the king moves, we're gonna play e4 now. Now the queen no longer defends the knight, and after d captures on e4, rook back to f4. Now put immense pressure on this knight here, and you're gonna have to start running away with the king, because if you play rook h3 or something like that, then g4, and now black is really breaking through. So it's a very interesting position. So instead, after rook to f4, you would have to maybe play queen to h7, but this is maybe even worse. After king to f7, the black king now runs away, and it's only the white king who will have to suffer the attack. So queen to f6 after rook to h1, definitely the way to go, but Mamedyarov plays g6. It seems like it should be working, but it's weakening the king maybe a little too much. So here Alireza plays queen captures on c6. We have g4. As expected, king to g1 now, and now rook captures on f3. We have rook captures on f3, queen captures on f3, and now, of course, not trading queens, Alireza plays queen captures on e6. This comes with check, queen to f7, and here Alireza trades, queen captures on f7. And now, what do you capture this with? Do you capture with the king or with the rook? If you capture with the king, then Alireza can bring his rook to the 7th rank with check, and then we're gonna pick up the c7 pawn, and it's a very difficult position for black to play. For example, rook d8, we're going to deliver a check here. For example, king to f5, defending the pawn. We're going to play rook c5, go after this pawn. And after rook captures on d3, we're going to play rook captures on b5. And we're up a pawn. We have 2 pawn islands. Black has 3 pawn islands. White would have excellent chances here. So instead, after queen captures on f7, of course, rook captures on f7 was played, but now Alireza goes for the doubled pawns on the g file. He plays rook to h4, goes after the g4 pawn, rook to d7, going after the d3 pawn. This is the only black counterplay black has. Rook captures on g4, rook captures on d3, rook captures on g6 with check, king f7, and now rook to c6. So again, rook to d2, only counterplay black has, and now you could capture on c7 with check right away, but Alireza plays c4. It's a bit of a quicker way to eliminate all the pawns from the board except the ones on the king side. So here we have rook captures on b2, rook captures on c7 with check, king e6, now rook to c6 check, not allowing the king to remain here. You can't go here, so you have to move somewhere. King to f5 is played. Now c captures on b5, and you can't really go for the pawn. If you capture the pawn, then rook to a6, you're going to lose this pawn as well. You're going to be down 2 pawns, and then it's going to be, well, you're going to be miserable there. So instead, after c captures on b5, we have rook to b3, the only way to play this with black. So Mamedyarov has to play unique moves to survive this endgame. We have b6, and now, of course, rook captures on a3. Alireza pushes b7. Now comes rook to b3, defending against the promotion, and rook to a6. We have rook captures on b7 and the rook captures on a4. So this is the absolute best Alireza could have gotten from the endgame that was on the board. All of the pawns on the queen side have been eliminated, and now this is the position. So can this be won? Well, let's see what happens. So here we have e4, keeping those pawns at bay. It's not going to be easy for white to activate. We have rook to a5 check, king f6, and king to f1. Alireza will try to bring his king into the game, but rook to b3. Of course, Mamedyarov will not allow this. King e2, we have rook to c3. Now comes rook to a8. And here, rook to b3. We have rook to f8 with check, and now comes king to e5. Mamedyarov brings his king deeper into the position, and here Alireza plays king to f1. It seems like, just a normal move. You're maybe even thinking about repeating the position, but maybe something incredibly dangerous lurks in the position. So feel free to pause the video here and try to find the only way to save this position for Mamedyarov while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations, you are a true machine when it comes to endgames. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, the correct idea for black is rook to f3. This is the only move that works. Point being that if the rooks are traded off the board, then this is a well-known endgame. That's a draw. For example, king e1, we're going to block that white king from entering the game. King d4, king d2, king d4, and we're always going to keep the opposition. And we don't really care what white does here. So that's what would happen if you capture the rook, but it doesn't help. If rook e8 check, we're just going to play king to d4. If we play king to g2 now, hoping to start advancing our pawn, at some point we're just going to play king back to d5. And if you start advancing the pawn, well, it's a little bit different with the rook on f3, because just rook f4 attacks the pawn, and if king defends the pawn, then just rook repeats. Rook f3 check. Now you either move the king and lose this pawn, or you defend and rook f4 again, and there's no way for white to make progress. However, after king to f1, Mamedyarov did not find rook to f3. He played king to d4, and now, incredible as it is, the position is completely winning for Alireza. He plays king to g2, and now there is no more there no more is a way for the G pawn to be stopped. Out of nowhere, Alireza completely outplays Mamedyarov. As you can see, the rook completely controlling the F file. The pawn will now be pushed forward. The king cannot help out with this, and there is no way for the black rook to somehow try and do something about this. There is nothing you can do. If you try some tricky moves like e3, trying to trade something off the board, we can just capture here, and you can't capture with the king because then just the rook here, and the rook is lost. And of course, if rook captures, rook to d8 with check, and it's not much better. Yeah, the king now has to move. You can't go in front of the rook because again we just trade, and after the king moves, king h3, and the king is again cut off from this endgame. This is of course completely winning. So here Mamedyarov tries rook to b7, but now comes king to h3. We have king to e5, and here Alireza plays g4. The pass pawn is now being pushed forward, and it was in this position on move 51 that Shakhriyar Mamedyarov resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. Which means that Alireza is now in live ratings. We have to remember over 2,800, so that would make him the youngest player ever to achieve this incredible milestone. I think he breaks Carlsen's record by some 6 months, which is incredible in itself. So it's not yet official because the ratings get updated every 1st of the month, so only on 1st of December will this become official. So if Alireza plays more games and loses them somehow, somewhere, then this will not happen, but I doubt that he will be playing, any games before December. So big congratulations to Alireza. This is simply incredible. Here you can see, let me just load this up real quickly. So there you have it, to make this official. There you have it. Carlsen still, of course, in first place with 28.55. Alireza with 28.03, which means that in this event, or rather in this month, he won 33.8 points, which is, for someone who was rated 2770, is just incredible. He won all the games, and only drew against Šarić and Grishuk, the games you've seen, and well, that's I mean, such an incredible run, breaking 2800 like this. Truly deserving, and well, it seems like Mamedyarov could have drawn this game a couple of times, but it's a team event, so you don't want to draw the game like maybe 15 moves into the game, and then you have this position that, that it's a draw. It's you're up upon, it's a rook endgame, of course it's a draw, but Alireza still manages to outplay him, and well, there you have it. Alireza is now a 2,800 player as of 1st of December. And also, I don't know what this means for the standings, because Ukraine and France have the same amount of points, so I don't know who wins first place, but as soon as I find out, I will inform you guys. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Big congratulations to Alireza, who now joins Magnus, as the two of them are the only two members of the 2,800 club. I would like to thank Micah Kennedy, Konstantinos Lompridis, Rod Hill, Tudor Shopper, and David Kimura for contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage, well, not of this event, but of something else that could be happening in the chess world, checking up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day. And I just remembered, even if you want to try something here, for example, rook h7 check, king g3, let's say rook g7, we're just going to play rook to f5 check. That's why it doesn't work. King e6, king f4, you're going to win this pawn. There's nothing you can do. Whatever you play, g5 can be played now. You're going to win this, and it's two pawns up, of course, completely winning. Forgot to mention this. So yeah, after g4, he resigned. Thank you all, and I will see you soon. Have an excellent rest of your day.